So thanks everyone for joining the town hall meeting of the lab. The topic today is language data as a shared resource. A while back, I saw the following headline in The Economist, and it read that the world's most valuable resource is no longer oil, but data. Data is the thing that drives our current economy. Now, on the lab side, from very early on, we realized that we either sit on a lot of language data or we have the potential to collect a huge amount of language data. And today, when you hear the term language data, I want you not only to simply think about text data. When we talk about language data in the lab, we reference text data, audio data, as well as video/sign data. So think of all three modalities when we talk about either data or language data. So after the realization that we are sitting on this really valuable resource, we ask ourselves, how do we use it best? How do we maximize the potential of this language data that we have? And from very early on, we started to partner with XRI, with Daniel Wilson and his team. And you'll hear today from Daniel, that's the founder and the CEO of XRI, about their very specific approach to language data that we call a structured approach. And that's the way that they collect data, and that's the way that they use data. So Daniel will tell us a bit more about that today. You'll also hear from Ryder Wishart, that's working very closely with the lab about his developing approach to using unstructured data. And we'll unpack both structured and unstructured data today in a bit more detail. But before I hand over to Daniel, I would like to share an image with you, and it's not mine. I got it from Jacob from SIL, but I think it's helpful to understand how data works and functions within our process. So we all love to enjoy the fruit of things, but for there to be fruit and for us to enjoy that, we need to start somewhere. In our case, we have an apple, so we have to start with a seed. So we have to plant the seed, and then as the seed grows, we have to nurture it, we have to fertilize it, we have to water it, and in some instances, we even have to prune the tree to cultivate it for us to enjoy the fruits of that seed. We also realize that cultivating the seed, and that the tree doesn't grow on its own. For it to bear the optimum amount of fruit, we have to have the attention of a gardener, taking care of the tree, watering it, and making sure that it grows well. Now, sometimes we start with a little bit of data. We collect a large amount of data. The seed needs to grow, and when we have more data, we have to cultivate. Add a bit of water, we add a bit of fertilizer, and when we have an abundance of data, we might even have to prune the data and fine-tune the data a bit to deliver the right amount of fruit. But at the end, if we cultivate the data we have, if we look after it well, we really can enjoy the fruit of our data. And in our case, it is not the gardener that takes care of the seed, it's the translator that takes care of the seed. It's the translator that cultivates it. It's the translator that makes sure that it produces the fruit that we all can enjoy. So think about this when you hear both Ryder and Daniel presenting. But I want to leave you with one key message. And this can be the lens that you look at the things that we are presenting today. And this is, language data accelerates and strengthens every stage of the Bible translation process. It accelerates and it strengthens every stage of the Bible translation process. So the question is not today if I can use The question today rather is, how can I use it to optimize my translation project? And as a lab, we would love to engage with you answering that question. How can I use it best? So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to Daniel to talk more about the XRI approach. So Daniel, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Koos, so much. You're always good with pictures, so really helpful. All right, I'm going to kick this off here. All right, hoping you can see my screen okay. And I've got my stopwatch started, so we're in good shape. Good to see a lot of familiar faces and glad to walk you through this. So I'm going to kind of cover this outline briefly. What do we mean by data? Koos has already kind of kicked that off for us. What does partnership look like? How does it help? What kind of projects benefit from the kind of work we've done? How did we get here and how do I get involved? So this is how we're going to structure the conversation. So when we think about the different approaches, we've talked in the E10 community about established and emerging approaches and things like this, but with established translation, what we have, the critical ingredients are, we have people that know source and target language, right? And they use that knowledge to draft scripture into their mother tongue. That's what we have on this left side here, is they already know this, right? But if we're going to transfer that knowledge to AI so it can be useful, AI needs to see enough source target correspondence to learn how to draft scripture into the mother tongue or adapt scripture, right, in certain ways, or even after the translation is done, the related content, right, for scripture engagement materials, that kind of stuff. AI's got to see enough in order to know the source and target correspondences. Now, the only way for us to do that in the majority of the languages that we want to work with is we have to basically get that information from these people, right? The people who understand both languages. And then we got to digitize it somehow, right? And so we've got to get that knowledge out of their head into a digitized format that then we can pass over, right, to train AI on the source target correspondences. So this is what we mean. This is a critical piece to the puzzle. Now, what kind of data is required? And this is where, Koos just talked about the structured approach. Now, one approach is we could just, show AI Bible translations, right? Like if a team has already translated portions of scripture, could we not just show AI, our models, the source and the target Bible verses? Yes, we can, and I'll get to that shortly. But if we're starting out, we don't have any Bible translation, or maybe we don't have enough Bible translation in order to teach it adequately. So what we've done is we've figured out how to get optimized sentences, right? So an optimized sentence basically takes into account, it looks at all the different concepts that are in the Bible. It extracts those concepts, and then we create custom sentences. Here's an example of a sentence. Showing unity, they decided to oversee the construction of a beautiful temple for him. It's a normal sentence. It doesn't occur in the Bible anywhere, but it's got a whole bunch of concepts that also show up in the Bible. So if we could get through structured, optimized sentences, what's the fastest, what's the most efficient, what's the most optimal way to get structured data in this approach, so that translators, if they can give us, going back here, right, their knowledge about the two different languages, what is the ideal data set for us to collect that can get us as quickly to training the AI as possible. So that's what we mean by data. That's the approach that XRI has taken up until now. Now, the great part about this is with these structured sentences, not Bible verses, but structured sentences, we can parallelize the whole task, right? So we can get a lot of community members involved in translating those sentences so that we can collect. With Bible translation, you've got to have, it's harder to parallelize, right? So you're not going to want 10 people each taking a verse, because there's so much about that, those verses that go together, right, and cohere and have discourse features and things like that. And so this approach allows us to sort of bootstrap and get started by having a lot of community members involved. So that's sort of the first question, is what does data look like in the approach that we've adopted? The second question is, what does partnership look like? XRI can't do this alone. In fact, none of the partners can do this alone. We've all got to partner and coordinate. So we've come up with, I think, a repeatable process here. And we've had, this is just a sample of the different partners that we've worked with all over the world, but we sort of follow this process. Assembling the translation team, we found that the translation team themselves are the ideal group to source the data from, of the structured data sets, the optimized data sets we collect. So because that helps us avoid dialect issues, that helps us avoid a lot of different stuff. So we assemble the translation team with our partners. We pick a source text, right? So the source texts are really important. We've got to understand, is Swahili the source language, Indonesian, French, Russian, what's the source language? Then we create the optimal data set based on that. Then we use an app that we've developed to collect the data, and I'll show that to you really quick. It's very simple. So when you come in, translators can select the language of the interface that they want to operate in. I've got a bunch of projects loaded here. Normally, translators would just pick the specific project that they're part of, but I'll do this. We'll just pretend that I'm doing this one. And then basically what they see is one of those optimized, structured, sentences, and then they enter the translation. And then after they do that, they click submit, right? And then we have, typically we have an audio task that jumps up as well. I wasn't able to get that ready, but an audio task where they click a record button and they actually speak the sentence that they just wrote as well. And so then we can use that audio data for other things that, if we get time, I'll go ahead and mention as well. But it's very simple. It's just a source sentence that they translate directly. And this is available in Android and iPhone, as well as just as a mobile app, and works with really low latency. Even if you have poor internet, it works well because of how simple it is. And so this kind of gives you an idea of what the translators that we have worked with, how they're using it in the data collection phase. And then with that, we either build the model ourselves or we work with a partner. Like I saw Michael in here earlier. Michael's team at SIL will train a model and then host that model and make it available in Scripture Forge and other tools like that, right, to create a draft. We're also working with another organization that is using an open source tool called Autographa, where we can basically build the model and we can generate a draft, and through API, we can push the draft directly into that tool, and it populates even their paratext project. So they can see the draft right there, and then they can begin post-editing it, and then they can request a retrain once they've done enough. The other interesting piece with that other partner is we're even able to build the model, and they're building out the infrastructure. It's in a sensitive part of South Asia, and they're nervous about, pinging servers in the United States. So we're actually sending the model over to that region of South Asia for them to host in their own infrastructure, so that they can call the model and the data never crosses borders. And so they can maintain that security and not introduce vulnerabilities as well. So building the model, we then generate the draft. The team edits that, and then that leads to completing the task. So this is kind of what a partnership looks like typically for us. And you may be asking, okay, this looks like a lot of work. What's the benefit? That's a good question. So how does it help? What have we seen so far? These are just a few of the things that have been reported. So some fields are reporting up to a 5 times acceleration in drafting in terms of the speed. What else is interesting, we didn't anticipate this, is translation teams are more oh, my fire alarm's going off, so hopefully you can't hear that. They're more willing to correct or criticize the drafts because they were, produced by a computer, right? They weren't produced by their uncle, or they weren't produced by, somewhat influential figure in the community, and they're reluctant to criticize and to do post editing. And so that's been an interesting side effect of this process. Reduces the blank page fatigue, right? Starting a new book or starting the Old Testament, right? You're staring at a blank page. Another interesting thing we didn't anticipate is teams get good practice with the orthography and standardization before working on the translation. Many of the projects we've done, it's brand new orthography, or maybe it's not achieved a level of standardization where everyone's very comfortable writing in the language. And so we've been able to use this initial phase to get sorry, my team is asking why our alarm's going off. So they get good practice, and they are able to kind of iron out some of the kinks in the writing system before they start messing with scripture. Another thing that the teams have demonstrated is that this actually ends up producing a translation resource they can use. We've all been part of different Bible studies. Hey, Zach, I can see all your messages when you post them.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. So there's a new translation resource that pops up. We've all been part of those Bible studies where everyone's reading like a NIV or NASB or New King James or something, and they're like, well, read your version. No, read your version. And it helps kind of bring some illumination. Similar thing is happening in these contexts where they'll run multiple drafts and they'll basically see how this is rendered. We've achieved through our data collection a breadth of how the language works, where it may dawn on them that, yeah, that word, I would have never thought of that word, but that word is actually ideal in this situation. And then just the intrigue of working with AI leads to a reduced cognitive load. Like if they're starting a new chapter or a new book or something, just knowing that they have this tool available, it's an engaging experience. So we're seeing boosts in both speed and quality. So what kind of projects are helped by this, right? So as Koos mentioned, no matter where we are on the life cycle of a project, all of them can benefit from an approach where we're collecting natural data as spoken by the community. So that's brand new starts with no data whatsoever and no scripture whatsoever. Those that have translated portions, those translating New Testaments, whole Bibles, and even those that have a whole Bible, but they need to refresh it. Maybe it was done 80 years ago. We are collecting language as it's currently spoken by the community, right? And so it provides a model that can provide a refresh to scripture that is not spoken that way anymore. And maybe the communities are leaving them on the shelves because they're outdated. This provides, I think, a faster way for doing that. And as you can see, this is a glimpse of the projects that we've done and their distribution. So a lot of different regions in the world, a lot of different source languages, and as you saw earlier, a lot of different partners. So this is kind of a snapshot of where we're at currently and the progress that we've made in this approach to collecting structured data and getting started with a translation. So it's real exciting to be in this. We're looking backward at everything we've learned and everything we've accomplished and all the different projects that we've impacted, and it's very fulfilling. So how did we get here? Just briefly, in 2022, it's actually fun going through my emails, Koos, all the archived conversations from years and years ago of everything we've done and worked through. But yeah, in 2022, kind of in hypothesis phase, what does it mean to collect good data, to train models on languages that have no data? Then we went into a heavy research phase. Last year saw a developing phase. This was 24 projects and 3 or 4 different iterations on the ideal data set. So a lot of trial and error where we discovered we collected data, we built models, we deployed them, we got feedback, we learned a lot, and then we went back and revised our approach to collect even better, to create even better data sets that address their needs, and just had a lot of really rewarding iteration cycles on that data set. And now here in 2025 in full utilization mode, where applying all the learnings that we've made, there's still improvements that we're making even this year, but we're definitely in a place much further than we were in the previous 3 years. So kind of you watching this it's the results of a lot of trial and error with a lot of different partners, a lot of experience, so that we're now poised to reach to enter the moment of scaling what we've demonstrated. So how do we get involved? I would love to talk with any of you that want to apply what we've learned here. This is sort of a big stretch goal for us. I would love to try and do 100 projects in 2026. And as you saw, that requires partners. That requires partners that are willing to try this method and receive the benefit of it. So please email me directly. If you can write my email address down, or email Koos, he's got it. And we would love to find a way to partner with more of you to scale this and use what we've learned to help the communities and the projects that you're working on. So, and with that, I've got 4 minutes remaining, so I'll stop and give Ryder more time. Thanks.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, now I feel like we can add some extra slides quickly. Let's do this. There we go. All right. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about something very analogous to what Daniel shared, but now talking about unstructured data collection. So what does it look like to take the structure requirement out of the picture? And so I want to just start with an illustration, though, about the value of what we're doing. Daniel talked about this. Koos mentioned this, that data is the most valuable resource on the planet right now. And just as a concrete picture, I see Gary's here, and we discussed this a few weeks ago, and I thought this is important to share. Right now, as I wrote here, you can create a completely novel Mandarin or English or Spanish or French Bible. And the Mandarin one in particular that we did, you can create it translating from Greek and Hebrew, and it takes 320 minutes and it costs $12 US. And we had someone spot check this one, and they said, yes, it's very, I mean, we asked for a very formal translation. He said it's formal to a fault. I think Randall's here. He was the one who did the checking on that, spot checking. But the critical thing to note is that you can do this right now today because we have lots of data in Mandarin. We have tons of data. And so if whatever you want in Mandarin, you can get it almost instantly and nearly for free. You actually can do it for free on your own machine if you want to wait a little longer. Now, this really highlights something important, and that is that the technology, figuring out, how to create technology that can do this is not a bottleneck. The technology problem is already solved. The bottlenecks that we have are data and adoption. So this is echoing what Daniel just shared. We really need to capture that data. We need to get the data that's necessary so that this can be the reality, not just for Mandarin, not just for English, not just for Spanish, but for as many languages as possible. And then adoption is the second part. We actually need to get on board and start doing this because we know what is possible right now. So we all need to pull together and actually gather that data and share that data. So there's two different applications that we've been working on. We're going to be focusing on LangQuest in this presentation. I just want to differentiate them so that nobody's confused about them. Codex is a desktop application, and it's for data transformation. The main thing it gets used for is translation, and right now it's being used for content translation. So things like subtitles and resources and things like that. We're doing some pilot tests with scripture translation as well, and those seem to be going quite well. And that's actually about leveraging AI to transform your data. What LangQuest is for is for collecting the data and validating your data. So right now, LangQuest is earlier in its sort of development life cycle. We're doing pilot testing and beta testing right now. And I'll share a little bit more about that. But LangQuest is designed for audio, text, images, multimodal data capturing. And just like Daniel shared, the really critical thing is to pull together samples across languages. So you can have, how do you say something in this language? And then how do you say it in another language? Or here's a picture of something, how do you say it in your language? Or here's some audio, and here's the text that goes with it. Whenever we're pairing things together, we're creating the capacity for AI to leverage that data and learn from that data. And LangQuest is also something we decided to design it for is unspecified data structure. You don't have to translate scripture. You can translate all kinds of things. So I'll show that in a moment. And both of these apps are open source. I'll share the links at the end. So unstructured data collection, what does that mean? Well, we were talking to a group from YWAM in Mazatlan. They're doing oral Bible translation. And what they said is they really need a box to put things in. And what they meant by that is you can record on your phone, audio, you can write text notes, but what you can't do very easily is organize all of that data. So as soon as you get beyond, a certain volume of data, organization becomes really, really important. And then not just organization, but also sharing that organized data between people on a project and then sharing it with others who want to use that data. And so they needed something that could work in hot places, damp places, that would be offline first. It has to work when there's very little or no internet or just occasional internet. If somebody lives in a remote village, but they occasionally travel into a city where they do have internet connection. And then there needs to be supervision-free merging and syncing. They didn't quite word it like that, but what they needed was a way to share the data between one another without having to call somebody up and say, hey, I really need to get my data shared with someone else. Can you do something to help me? It needs to just happen automatically. And then what we gather from them is that reliability is even more important than speed. They're all about translating quickly in the OBT world, but reliability of storing and keeping that data is far more important because it only takes a couple, experiences of losing a whole chapter of audio for someone to become very quickly disillusioned with a tool or solution or option. And so we prioritized reliability. Now, this app, LangQuest, is for capturing data. You don't actually need to use AI at all. Someone doesn't have to be interested in using AI, but the value of the data is, it's hard to measure at this point because it's kind of like in early investing in something that is going to be incredibly valuable in the future. So anybody who wants to store their data, have a box to put things in, they can use this. But we know that this data is going to be immensely valuable for gaining additional leverage as we use AI to learn and use that data. So this is just a very simple image of how it works. Basically, there's a cloud database up, on a server, and you can view the database right now. I'll show you a link where you can go and look at that. And then there's all the different user devices. Sometimes they're offline, sometimes they're online. It just works seamlessly. When you get online, it starts syncing up whatever you have and syncing down anything from your other people on other projects or on your project. And okay, let's do a demo. I'm gonna use my live one here. Let me just do another share. Okay, can you guys see that? Yeah, good. All right. So here I've got the app. I can see all of the projects that are up on the cloud. And then I can also see my projects that I have permissions on. You can see some of them are locked or closed, so not open to public contributions, and others are open. Anyone can contribute translations on them. So this one, for instance, is a particular structure of biblical passages. I can go in and when I go into a project, I have quests. Quests are just tasks to get done. When I go into this quest, these are the verses that this particular project wants translated. I can look at each one. I can listen to the audio.
It came about after these things that God.
and I can submit my own translation of text if I want to do text, or audio I can record. Now, that's text, and those are Bible verses. But what we're actually interested as well in is being a little bit less structured. So, for instance, in this project, basic data gathering, I just put this together. I can translate, for instance, nature images. So I can say, okay, here is a forest. You know, what do you call that? And someone's able to leave a translation of whether, you know, text or audio, what do they call that in their language? I've got here, you can see I had someone else from my team submit a couple of translations, and you can vote on them or validate them. And the best, you know, the most highly voted ones would float to the top. We don't have to use this sort of voting mechanism. This is just one way to validate the data. But we can also do things like, you know, CAPTCHAs that you see on websites where it says click on all of the crosswalks. What they're doing there is they're giving you data that they already know something about, but they're also getting your input to help validate that data. And so we can do that as well with translations. For instance, you could show a translation, and to validate it, you can say, which source text did this translation come from? And give them a few options. If they can correctly pick the source text, great, it's probably a pretty decent translation. If they can't correctly pick the source text, you might want to take a second look at that data you've gathered. Yeah, anyways, that's probably all I want to show, except we can localize the app. It's already, I think it's got 4 or so languages localized. And once you get a couple localizations, it's easy to add more. Yeah, you can see here, it says it last synced at 9:18 a.m. And if I join another project, it will sync down and pull the data down to my device. I can go offline, I can do all of my translations, and it will sync them back up when I'm online. We have, you know, project invitations. You can invite someone to your project by email. They'll see a notification in their app saying, hey, join this project. Or you can change the permissions of the project. You can make other people owners, etc. So we've tried to make it broadly useful for the kinds of projects that we're actually seeing. Okay, let me just go over here then. So what are some of the benefits of an app like this? Let me jump to my presentation. There we go. All right. One big benefit is that you can remove logistical bottlenecks. So you don't need devices, you don't need machines. You just need smartphones, and most people that you're going to be dealing with already have them. We have it published on the Android Play Store right now. It's in review in the App Store for Apple. That wasn't as high priority, but it's becoming higher priority. You can also maximize the leverage of the data. So whatever you're able to capture can be stored in this nice box to put things in and organized and aligned with other languages. So if you have audio or text or images, it's very flexible in that regard. You can, there's also the possibility to capture highly natural language data, because you don't have to start with an outside language and ask them, how would you say this? You can start with their language, have them record stories, and then we can back translate it into a language of wider communication. So there's a lot of great opportunities there. This reduced the costs a lot potentially. So this is open source. You can just download it and start using it. Yeah, that's going to be a big factor as well as we try to scale some of these approaches. In terms of what organizations and on-the-ground teams are able to do, this really gives you a lot of flexibility, because you can have multiple projects going on even with the same team. They can be small, they can be big, they can be scripture, they can be other kinds of unstructured data. You can use this to go out and survey an area where you can have a simple quest like the images that I showed you, bring that to a community and start asking them, how do you say this? How do you say that? And even do an assessment of whether they need a translation in their language. And then we think it's very beneficial to have the data collection tool and the data validation all in one package. So you can gather data. You don't have to validate it. Your team doesn't have to. If there's cultural or other reasons you don't want to do that, but you can actually validate the data right in the app. And so it's very natural to produce validated natural data from the app. Okay, a couple, the pilot tests we're doing are mostly with YWAM. and they've been very flexible and open to trying new things, as you can imagine. And so the OBT group in Mazatlan, Mexico, I already shared they need a way to capture stories. Or actually, this is another one. This is YWAM in Brazil. We're working with them right now, and they're having a hard time with some of the data sets they've been trying to use where the content's just a little bit too abstract for the groups that they're trying to work with. And so they said, let's flip it around and let's just go and capture stories from these cultures. And so we'll get them to record different genres of stories, and that will be our initial data gathering. And then they'll assess where to go from there. We're also working with YWAM group in Nepal, and this group, they, like I wrote here, they need a faster way to capture data. So we have in production, or sorry, in development right now, a way to just very rapidly record multiple segments of data just using voice activity detection. And so this will fit with their kind of fast workflow a lot better, and will provide some additional flexibility in the app. There's a couple other apps that are somewhat comparable. One of them is this PG Studio app from Mars Hill Productions. I've seen it in a number of areas, but I talked to the Jesus Film about this, and they are excited to use it for their localization of the Jesus Film. And I think it's going to be a great fit for that. But it is, again, it's highly structured and it's very tailored to the specific task that they want to do. Adapting it to another task is going to be a big lift. And the other thing, the person was telling me, I'm just going to share this anecdotally, so maybe don't quote me on it, but they said, well, everything is offline first. I said, oh, that's great. We also value that. They said, so you can just hand an SD card to someone and say, here's all my data. And I thought, oh, that becomes a bit of a challenge and bottleneck. So that might be one of the problems there. But I think definitely worth looking at that app and seeing what they do well. It looks like a fantastic app in a lot of ways, but might have some gaps that LangQuest can fill. OMT Record, this is an app that YWAM made internally from a volunteer there. And it's great. It's fantastic in terms of a rapid user interface. They don't need to use Audacity and have all this hardware anymore. But it's a little bit fragile while post editing and that sort of thing. So I'd encourage you to go look at that app as well. That's on the App Store, or at least it's on, yeah, I think it's on the App Store and the Play Store as well. So definitely take a look at both of those. And then here's some links. So you can go to the LangQuest website, and I'll just quickly show that. Codex, there's also the website. I've got the code bases linked here. I guess that is not a full URL. Those are just GitHub. You can't see the GitHub part of the URL, but and then you can also contact me. I'd love to hear about use cases that some of you have. So if anyone has something they want to just kind of ask about and find out, hey, is there any way you could use LangQuest for this kind of project? We'd love to hear about it. We're working on some features such as automatic transcription of the audio and a few other things. But yeah, definitely let me know if you've got questions about that. I'm going to just show, this is the LangQuest website. You can log in on the website, and actually there's let me just see. Yeah, I'm already logged in here. So there's a project management dashboard. So here's that project that I just made, basic data gathering, and I made 2 quests in there, and for each one I added a certain number of assets. So I added those images for translating. So this is where you can create projects right now. We're just working on a way to actually create projects in the app as well to make that a little bit smoother. And then the other thing you can do is at the top, you can view all of the data. So if somebody wants to come and pull down data, they can hit the export button and download all of the tables from the database with the attachments included. And so right now there's not the volume of data that we hope will be there eventually, but everyone who joins, you accept the terms of service that you're sharing your data. And what our hope and our dream is that we could get a lot of validated ultra low resource language data, and then we can reach out to our friends at Meta and Google who spend many, many millions of dollars training AI models and letting us use them, and say, here's language data, please train a model so that, in a year or 2 years or 3 years, people in these communities can open up WhatsApp and it can speak their language. And then we can also, of course, leverage it for Bible translation and achieving the goals we need to reach. So, all right, that's all I've got there. So I'll hand it over to Dal.
Hey, thanks, Ryder. We have the least technologically, maybe even least innovative mind on the Zoom call, following two of the most technologically inclined and most innovative. I have only two or three things that I'm asked to add. A couple are just reminders from what we have heard. One is we've learned through experimentation and development that gathering data and informing an AI model with that data is useful and applicable at any stage of translation. Should you and the teams on the ground desire to begin to work in this augmented way. So this approach isn't limited to a language where you're simply trying to move from a New Testament to a full Bible. It's not limited to a language where you're working on a revision. It is and can be applicable, useful accelerant and improvement to the process at any stage of translation. I think the second point and reminder would be that I think if you had asked us 3 years ago, is the challenge going to be the technology or the data or adoption? I think we would have said, well, it's technology, because the original commissioning that was given the E10 Innovation Lab was to explore and discover whether or not artificial intelligence could even play a role in Bible translation. I think 3 years ago, we would have said, no, we don't even know if the technology will work. It's clear today that the bottleneck or the issue is not technology. The technology today is as bad as it's ever going to be. And it is sufficient today to do what you have seen, even modestly demonstrated. The bottlenecks, the solutions that need to be brought to bear are data and adoption. And then I would augment the word adoption by saying improvement. There's a passion, there's a desire, there's an invitation, there's a plea to begin adopting, working with, testing, poking holes in, playing around with, start swimming in this space. The more people who are attempting to use these apps and models to gather data, the more we're going to learn about what's wrong with the process of gathering data. And I would just encourage us, rather than fall into the potential of observing and watching from afar with a critic's eye, to get in the water and start swimming around and help us all learn what can be improved by participating. That will help solve the data bottleneck. The more, the merrier. So with the bottleneck of adoption, I think it's not just a call to adopt, it's a call to participate in a way that improves. I think that would maybe be the second reminder. And then I would say we have heard, at least today, a couple of different approaches. You know, there's a way to go about this that's a bit more structured, where the data that's involved in being learned from is highly structured. And then there's other cases where it's unstructured. And both have demonstrated early use cases. In a more structured environment, perhaps Bible-related language data already exists, and maybe there's already a team that's in place, and that allows for the approach to be a bit more structured. There are other cases where there's no data and there are no teams. So the approach, perhaps there's a crowd involved. Perhaps it's simply a virtual group that are using the app and they're voting thumbs up or thumbs down on whether or not the unstructured sentences that are being translated sound good to them or bad to them. What I would encourage us to see is that neither of these approaches, they're not competing with one another. They're hybrid approaches. Those are both and, depending on the circumstances. They're highly complementary. You have seen two different mobile applications that have been introduced today. We hope there are 15. This isn't about one mobile application or another. It's not about the app that XRI has developed. It's not about the app that Ryder has developed. It is about applications that serve these communities. So that's what we're encouraging, and the higher the participation rate, the better across these developing and complementary approaches. Finally, it would be useful perhaps for this group to know that because of the importance of data and what's being learned about data that is closely related to Scripture, even if not Scripture, AI can learn from content in the target language. It learns best for the purposes of Bible translation when that data is Bible related, let's say. So we have a lot of partners in mission whose focus is not Bible translation. Their focus is in evangelism and church planting or pastoral training and equipping. But they would love to do ministry in these minority languages, leveraging content in that minority language. But they've not done much of that to date because of the cost and or logistical and or time prohibitions to see that content available in those minority languages. What happens if they were able to do their ministry in those minority languages and they were able to have content in those languages without having to engage in such a logistically time-demanding process? What we've learned is there are across mission sectors, there is interest today, not just for those who are working expressly in Bible translation, but those who are creating content to do ministry in other ways. They realize also that data is king. And not just their data and their content, but data that could be gathered for the sake of doing their ministry in those minority languages. So E10 is in the early stages of sponsoring and stewarding the convening of an intersector group. It's not fully mature yet. The first meeting has been held with about 10 or 15 different representatives across multiple sectors of mission to determine whether or not they're interested in sharing a data platform. Can we cultivate, curate, shepherd data, language data, in a way that creates cross-mission benefit? If so, can the language models that are being informed by that data be also deployed in a shared space? Why do we need 12 language models in a minority language? Why not have one language model that is highly trained by multi-sector data? And why can't those language models be deployed in a common way, in a common platform, and be part of the translation resource ecosystem? That initial meeting has been convened. It's backed by the support and light investment of the E10 resource partners. In fact, 2 of the E10 resource partners were sitting in that room for a full day participating in that meeting. And there will be next steps, because what we learned and didn't know going into it, it was a thesis as to whether or not there would be cross-sector interest. What was confirmed that day is that there is, and there's a high appetite to proceed with that. So that's just a point of awareness for the group that places an exclamation point perhaps on the importance of data and the increasing adoption and testing of these things. Isabella, I think I have performed the task that I was asked to perform today. I'm going to turn it over to you and see if you want to maybe facilitate a Q&A or interaction, or how you would like us to go from here.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Dal. Thank you to Ryder and Daniel as well for participating today. So we will have a few minutes now to answer any questions. It can be to Dal, to Ryder, to Daniel, to Kuz, to any of us here at the lab. I do see that there's a question in the chat from Jeff. I wonder if Michael Martin, if you might be able to respond to this question from Jeff. He asked, he'd love to see some data of how language data has augmented a translation that is typically a slingshot project. Michael, are you able to chat with us about that?
I was thinking about Daniel's response as we've been sort of back testing the data sets with portions of the New Testament particularly, and looking for how that affects different genres and different progress. Like, are you halfway done? Are you just starting your first gospel? Somewhere in between. So we have some data on that we've been learning from.
Great, thank you. We have another question in the chat. Kuz, you might help me direct that one, but what kinds of conversations are being had with the language communities whose data is being harvested concerning data sovereignty?
Isabella, I think I'll hand it to Daniel Wilson, because Daniel, I know XRI has been doing a lot of work and research on that, making sure that they are compliant with whatever restrictions or opportunities there are in different countries. So Daniel, maybe share some of that, because I think you've done some really good work on that space.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to share that. It's a great question to ask. So the question of data sovereignty, is about, where the data lives, where it resides, and is it obeying the laws of the land as far as cross-border transfer. And a lot of countries are dealing with this question as they want AI to work for them, but they also understand there's national security concerns, there's privacy concerns, et cetera, with sharing data back and forth to American servers, and all of that. I think the important thing here is that, usually the data sovereignty question is about personally identifiable information. So that means your email, your email address, your name, your address, your, whatever your equivalent of your government ID number is, or something like that. All of that transferred back and forth. We're not actually collecting any of that data. What we're collecting is text data, right? That is a sentence that isn't necessarily doesn't disqualify the laws. Now, certain countries, you saw our map, we've worked in a lot of different countries. We have a thorough process where we evaluate the laws of that country as far as data localization, privacy, sovereignty, and transfer. We look at all of those laws of those countries as they're evolving, they're constantly changing, to make sure that we're complying in that region. The one issue that I think the community will have to settle is audio data. Audio data is considered a biomarker, right, and is considered personally identifiable information in some parts of the world. We look to Common Voice as an example that has been collecting voice data all over the world in almost every country for the last decade. Our team has had conversations with their leadership and what solutions they've implemented to make sure that people can opt out, right? If they want their data removed from the data set, how do they make sure that they comply with that request, et cetera. So it's an important question, and it's one that we're highly sensitive to in every region that we work in.
Daniel, there's a follow-up question to that in the chat. I think there's a related question concerning language data and the sovereignty of the community to decide whether they want their language data to be used in training a large language model.
What's really interesting is a lot of the communities that we work in, and I've been on panels talking about this with a lot of Western stakeholders, and they're like, the community ought to own their data, And what's interesting is we bring up this conversation with a lot of people in these low resource communities, and we ask them, we ask them about their view on owning the data. And they don't have a clue what we're talking about, because they wouldn't, these are communities that by and large are not online. They are not digital native, and they don't know what value it would bring them to own the sentence, "I like to eat chicken sandwiches." Like, that's the equivalent to the kind of data we're collecting. And you know, I've asked the question of those same in those same conferences: do you own the sentences that you say in English? And I've asked that same question, and they're like, "I don't understand what you mean. Like, I don't own this. My mother speaks it, my father speaks it, my uncle speaks it. We all speak it. And I just told you I like to eat chicken sandwiches. I don't really own that sentence. I don't know what you mean." And what's interesting is, when we talk about, when I've had these conversations with the low resource language communities, when they understand that ownership of a data set for training a model means that they're the only ones that get to build with it, well, essentially doing that, they're basically self-selecting out of the most advanced technology that's actually going to be built for that community. That's what that means ultimately for them, because they don't have researchers at Meta that speak that language, right? That or in this community that are going to build models with it. And so for them, they're like, "I just want stuff built for my language," ultimately. And so that's the stuff that we're hearing from the communities. There are exceptions in the First Nations community, in the Norwegian, Scandinavian countries, and in things like old, Irish and stuff like that. But the more wealthy countries have a lot of, anyway, I won't bring that example up, but those are there's a lot of sensitivity around that. But in the low and middle income countries, that's typically the response we get. So.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Because maybe a follow-up to that is, some people may be concerned that their translation teams might be skeptical as well. So how do you think we should go about normally introducing new technology to teams?
So Isabella, I can only speak from what I've seen, and I think there's a couple of people on the call that's done a really great job. If I look at Publica SAL, the seed company, the way that they've introduced the technologies within these communities were really in a responsible way. So they would hold a workshop, they would field questions about what the technology is, what it can do, what it can't do. I've seen how Michael and Bethany and them produce drafts that they show people kind of in a very kind of open way. People choose which drafts they like. People see that if they make a change to a draft, that change is implemented in the next draft that is produced. So I think it is not dumping the technology on language communities. It's actually working with them to develop it. That is really powerful. And as Daniel said, we haven't seen any pushback where we follow that approach within a language community to either help with collecting language data or to adopt and using the technology available.
All right, thank you. We're running out of time here, but I did just want to say that if you have extra questions that you want to see addressed, please send us an email at lab@e10.bible. This is one of the opportunities that you have to connect with the lab and to get clarity and transparency from the projects that we are doing, but it's not the only opportunity to do so. I also do suggest visiting our website, lab.e10.bible as well. If you scroll to the bottom of the homepage, you can subscribe to our newsletter and receive even more updates of what's been happening. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you next time.